I always think there are a couple of really important things to keep in mind when you're talking about evaluating prospects, and specifically when it comes to quarterbacks. Number one, not every completion or touchdown is a great throw or a great play. Not every interception or incompletion is necessarily a bad throw or a bad play. Things like completion percentage can be about the perspective. If you're always dinking and dunking within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, like your completion percentage may be higher, but that might not be a reflection of accuracy and ball placement even within that. Accuracy, ball placement, I think of accuracy as in you kind of get in the general wheelhouse. Ball placement is the effectiveness of where you throw the ball, when and how, that type of thing. Another important thing I think that we have to keep in mind when it comes to quarterbacks is we must grade them based off of their projectable traits, their skills, their individual strengths, their individual weaknesses, and we must stay away from grading guys because they went to this school and this school's produced great quarterbacks, or they went to this school who historically has produced crappy quarterbacks at the NFL level, or disappointing quarterbacks, or a wide swath of busts at the position. Yeah, it's very critically important to avoid that type of thing, because if you always stick with that, I could go back to the days of, you want to stay away from a Tedford coach quarterback because those guys will be no good. You would have passed on an Aaron Rodgers. You don't want anything to do with the air raid offense type of quarterbacks. You don't want to have those guys. They don't project well to the NFL level. You'd have passed on a Patrick Mahomes. You see what I'm saying? There could be a danger there in associating somebody with a school's history or trend at that quarterback position, because it may not have any correlation to who they are as a prospect, which of course brings me to Justin Fields. You're going to have plenty of people that automatically assume that he's going to be a bust because he's an Ohio State quarterback, and especially because the history at the position with that school is not great. Certainly isn't. And you also have a most recent notable bust example of Dwayne Haskins being cut within 2 full seasons of being drafted 15th overall by the Washington Redskins, the Washington football team. You know, it's true. The history is not great for Ohio State quarterbacks. You have a recent example of a flameout. But that said, it's incredibly unfair to Justin Fields and incredibly foolish and silly from a talent evaluation standpoint to hone in or focus on that. Whether Justin Fields succeeds or doesn't succeed at the NFL level is going to be based off of his skills, his traits, his projectable talents to the next level, his growth and his improvement as a passer, period. And I'm torn here with Fields because, you also have to overcome this bit of a thing of, some people are really sucked into a big name like Justin Fields because he played at a big name school, played in a lot of marquee big name games. You go to that college football playoff semifinal against Clemson, and you say, man, he really outplayed Trevor Lawrence. Again, though, you have to avoid those pitfalls such as assuming end results, necessarily translate. They don't always. And as much as I want to say all of this, I don't think Justin Fields is quite as good of a prospect as you've probably seen many people make him out to be for months. I think he has some flaws, a couple of really serious flaws that there's no guarantee that you can coach these up. If you can, you could have something. But if you can't, you're talking about bust city, baby. But again, based off of him, Justin Fields' traits, his characteristics, his skill sets, what have you. Now, as a side note, I will say, regardless of what I'm going to say here in the next few minutes in the scouting report, Kirby Smart was really fucking stupid to choose Jake Fromm over Justin Fields. That's clown school shit right there. It's not always about the number of right decisions that we make. It's about the key decisions, the impactful decisions, and what we decided and what we may have learned from them. Like, that was a decision that probably cost him at least one national championship, like horrendously bad. But let's move on to Justin Fields as a prospect. Like, he has those plays and he has those moments on film that you watch him and you say, I can see it. I can see elements of Russell Wilson. I agree. I can see elements of Deshaun Watson. I also agree. You know, he's arguably the best athletic quarterback in this draft, the best scrambler, the best at being able to extend plays, the best at being able to pick up yards with his feet. Like, it's a big strength. And, you know, maybe 15, 20 years ago, this wouldn't have been valued as much in the NFL, but now it is. And when you look at a guy like a Justin Fields, you can say it buys them time, because all of these quarterbacks will have flaws in different areas. All of them. Doesn't matter. Lawrence, Wilson, Fields, Lance, doesn't matter. Mac Jones, you name it. They've all got flaws. But you like to have those special traits or characteristics that you could draw upon as you develop these other areas and say, this is my fallback and this is what I've got. Now, what you do in terms of your growth and progression will be important. But, you know, you look at it and you could say whatever you want about Lamar Jackson as a passer or what Baltimore has done to kind of help him in that offense. But Lamar Jackson could rely upon his running abilities. And he won a league MVP. The Ravens have made the playoffs the past couple of seasons. Now, Justin Fields is not that level of Michael Vick type, Randall Cunningham type of runner and scrambler. But he's borderline elite level like a Deshaun Watson, like a Russell Wilson. And it will be that ability to extend plays, that ability to get extra yards with his feet when defenses have everything covered downfield, that will give him a fighting chance. He's got a decent arm. I don't think his arm is special, similar to Trevor Lawrence. I've seen him be able to fit the ball into some tight spots sometimes, but then I see some of the perimeter throws, you know, especially when you're talking about 10, 15 yards down the field, gets quite a bit of air under it. Not like Joe Burrow noodle arm level of air, but you'd like to see him be able to zip the ball in more consistently when I actually was able to see him do. Now, he flashed moments, but again, flash. It's not consistent. And I will say, too, that the arm strength is good enough. Like, I saw enough NFL throws out of him. Like, I was expecting, watching Justin Fields, that I was going to be less a fan of his ball placement than I actually was. Like, he showed me throughout the course of 2020 that he was able to hit the big-time NFL throws that you want guys to be able to make. The fade, the back shoulder. Like, his ball placement on some of those is really good, and at times, frankly, better than Trevor Lawrence. So while you could say he's got some work to do in terms of his ball placement on some of the more basic throws, I would certainly agree with that, and he will need to get better there. I don't think that's going to be the thing that holds him back in the NFL whatsoever. I think it really comes down to two things with him, because he's a durable kid, a tough kid. Everything I've seen about him, everything you read about him is that he's a good leader. You know, he was a guy that originally started at Georgia, came to Ohio State, and he's been in a lot of marquee games and in big spots. He's a proven winner, all of this. Like, it doesn't happen by accident, even though win should not automatically be a quarterback stat. There is a pressure associated with the position that you've seen Justin Fields be able to handle. So that is something that can translate. That's something that you like. That's one of those intangible type of things. That said, though, I really look at him and I see two things that really concern me. Two things that borderline terrify me when it comes to Justin Fields as a prospect. And more so specifically in relation to when I see these red flags, it would really give me pause if I'm thinking about drafting a quarterback in the top 10. Especially, let's say, if I was the 49ers who have just made the deal to move up from 12 to 3. Yeah, I don't know that I would be that comfortable taking a Justin Fields here, because he's got two major flaws as I see it. Number one, mechanically, his release is slow, which in and of itself isn't the deal breaker. But his windup is slow, his platform can be inconsistent. The point I'm getting at is that he has enough arm strength to be able to have a slower release and still fit the ball into some tight windows. Think like a Cam Newton. You know, Cam Newton had a horrendously long release, but when he was right and his shoulder was right, like, you could sit there and get away with that kind of long, hitching throwing motion because he had an absolute laser beam. So you could get by with that. But you have to be more precise when you do that. You have to be on top of shit, because if not, you're going to struggle fitting the ball into those tighter throwing windows, and you're going to come out with some interceptions that you should have. But when you take that slower release and those so-so mechanics and you combine that with the absolute flaw of his game that is striking and so damn obvious, which is the slow processing, the slow reaction time, it's a flag, and it's a major red flag. It's one thing if you're a little tick behind when it comes to processing what you see. If you've got a hose and you can get that ball out quickly, you could potentially get by with that. But when you start talking about you have a slow release and then you're slow to process what you're seeing and be able to react to it, now that longer release, that slower release, becomes an even bigger hindrance, becomes an even bigger problem. And I'm not 100% sure if some of it may have been systematic. Ohio State may be running a lot of complicated route packages with the receivers, a lot of option routes, and therefore Justin Fields wouldn't always trust what he sees. But you could even go back to the college football semifinal against Clemson, and you see multiple plays where there was one where they're in the red zone. He ends up running for a touchdown. So you're like, again, result, great, but he missed two open receivers. And he even saw one of them and still didn't react to what he saw. That's a major red flag. And speaking as a Chicago Bears fan that just got done with 4 years of the Mitchell Trubisky experience, it wasn't that Mitch was just inaccurate, which he was. It wasn't just that he was afraid to run, which he ended up being for some weird reason, even though that was the best trait that he had. What really fucked him, what really screwed him up, and what really made him the bust that he ended up being was his inability to process information, process what he was seeing, and be able to quickly and decisively react to it. That's a confidence thing. That's just the synapse is not firing. That's wanting to have confirmation and trust. Like, you could only but coach so much of that out of somebody, because that's a natural inherent trait. And when I see Justin Fields consistently, I see Trubisky-like elements in that way, and frankly, worse, and that terrifies me. Now, if you get a Justin Fields into a situation, this is me personally, where I wish he would kind of drop down the board and get somewhere like a New Orleans, somewhere like a Tampa, where he could learn, where he could be coached up, I might like his chances a little bit better. But if you're now starting to talk about like an Atlanta Falcons, or maybe somebody like a Carolina Panthers, a Denver Broncos, one of those types of teams, maybe a Washington football team, or God forbid the Chicago Bears, I would have real trepidation and real worry about whether or not they're going to be able to develop this young man. Now, maybe the Atlanta Falcons will say, you know what? We have Matt Ryan. We have no pressure to play Justin Fields for a year or two. Let him learn, sit, and develop behind Matt Ryan, and that might be great. Might be the way you have to go here, even though I'm not usually a huge advocate or champion for that. But I'm telling you, you can go game after game after game. It does not matter. This is not a once-in-a-while thing. This is not some games it happens a lot, some games it doesn't happen much. This happens consistently, game in and game out, time after time. Whether it's primary read, like you see a little bit of a flash of him being able to go through his progressions and being able to go through and find his second or third option. But the problem is the processing time, the reaction time. Let me be clear. If you can coach this up and you can get him to be more confident and more trusting of what he sees, Justin Fields could have QB1 potential in this draft. There's no question about it. And I certainly hope, based off of where I have him graded, that I end up being wrong, because I like him. But I wouldn't want anything to do with him in the top 10, because that flaw is so striking. And you've seen a lot of quarterbacks over the years that even if they have some physical tools, the Blake Bortles and the Blaine Gabberts and Mitchell Trubiskys, I could go on and on and on, that if they can't process and react to what they're seeing, they're doomed for failure. I see as many, unfortunately, Mitchell Trubisky traits in Justin Fields as I do with Deshaun Watson. He could be either one of those guys. So I guess the question I ask is, like, when you factor that in, to me, he's a second or third round talent, like running that borderline. He's more like QB 6 or 7 in this draft. If you were sitting there and you were drafting in the top 10 and you know these concerns, would you feel comfortable drafting him that high?